Hi, and welcome to the webinar. So this is my last webinar now for before the summer break. I normally take a break in July, August, and then I will be back in September to start a new series. So welcome. For those who don't know me, I'm Helen Trethui. I've been working in education for coming up to 30 years. It's quite exciting. And 22 years of those I've worked in inclusion under various guises, SENCO, INCO. I'm now the assistant principal for inclusion and individual needs. Nice title. And also 20 odd years of it have been in the international context. And for the last few years, I've been doing a series of webinars, and generally I do a kind of monthly webinar for free. I'm afraid in the future it might have to change with the economic crisis, but anyway, for the moment it's still for free. And it's nice to see some familiar faces joining me today. And also I noticed with the list of, because I get to see who's registered, lots of new names. So I don't know how many people, obviously for a lot of people this is lunchtime. If you're in Asia, this is the evening. So we'll see how many people are actually able to join live and how many people will get the recording afterwards. Now, as ever, the reason I'm kind of rambling a little bit is just to give people a chance to join. I'll actually start the webinar properly in a few minutes. But if you are online, it'd be really lovely if you could just type a message in the chat bar just to say where you're listening from. I could see actually from the registrants list that there's quite a few people. I see I've got someone from Hong Kong already, a familiar person. I don't tend to use people's names online because obviously this is being recorded and then, you don't know who's watching it. So someone from Belgium, lovely. So many people seem to join me again and again, which is very reassuring. And it's nice to see some new people joining. So the talk today, I will kind of get started. So the talk today is, it's strange because it's a new webinar in the sense that I haven't given this webinar before, but for me, it's not really a new topic. And I would say, quite honestly, I was doing metacognition before it was ever kind of coined and mentioned everywhere about metacognition. I feel like even when I was a class teacher, I did talk to the students about their learning and how they were feeling and, trying to get them involved in the learning process. And then particularly once I started working, I will call it inclusion today, individual needs. Once I started working with small groups and individuals, it was one of the key things that I like to say I kind of naturally do. I don't know actually why I did it. But you'd see that many students would get very discouraged very easily when they found things difficult. And I would always make a big point of talking about how our memory works and talking about how we feel when we're learning, and that sometimes when we're learning something new, it's a bit scary. And sometimes, it's a bit like doing exercise. One of my favorite phrases, and I'll probably come back to it later. I used to teach phonics groups, but to children who were really struggling to learn the alphabet or alphabet sounds. And I would say to them, well, if you're running around in the playground, that's exercise. And sometimes you run too much and you get out of breath and it feels a bit uncomfortable. And this is the same. This is brain exercise. And when you're exercising a bit of the brain where it's a bit tricky for you, it might feel a bit uncomfortable. And children just knowing that helps them to persevere and not to kind of give up. And I would say that the success of many of the individual sessions I used to do and groups was purely down to talking about the learning and talking honestly about what was going on. because teachers often used to comment about why is it the students are so happy and relaxed with you, and they seem like different children. And it's because when you're in a smaller group and it's okay to make a mistake. I used to make mistakes, and I talk about the mistakes that I made. I might mispronounce something, or I'd write something on the board and I'd miss a letter off and someone correct me. So all of those things are making it kind of real, and children knowing that you struggle as well with learning, I think all really help to create an atmosphere where they can learn. So that's in essence where this is coming from. But I notice now, I always do a little bit of research before I do the webinars, and I try and include current thinking. But if you look at the things, of course, there's a huge push for it now. You've got the Education Endowment Fund, have a whole report on it and a whole lot of resources about how to teach it and how it should be introduced in schools. And there's a link later on in the presentation to do with that. And it does give you a really good framework if you're interested. And it's mentioned on lots and lots of websites. For those who know me as well, when I'm on LinkedIn, I post articles, and I also read the stuff on LinkedIn, and very often there are things about metacognition. So I think it's in everyone's dialogue now. But I hope today to kind of almost like demystify it a bit. When I was doing the slides, I kind of almost felt like it was a bit too simple. At the end, I do refer to some different other websites and to some articles. So if you feel like I'm making it all too simple, and you want to do more reading, and you want to kind of reassure yourself that there is proper research behind all of this, then feel free to use those resources. But today I'm actually going to talk about it from quite a kind of personal, experiential kind of point of view, and just things that I've noticed over the years that I would like to share with you. And as I say, if you want to kind of dive a bit deeper and feel like you've got a real kind of framework around it, then I would say to look at the things on the last few slides and follow some of those links. So anyway, I think that's enough preamble, because I feel like people anyone who's going to join live has joined now, and then hopefully some people will watch this as a recording. So let's get crack on to what is metacognition. I think I've already given you a little bit of a flavour of what it is. In essence, it's very simple. It's learning to learn. It's about understanding how we as people learn. And children start learning from like day one, but of course, usually they're doing things that they enjoy doing. So if you take a typical preschool situation, children are generally allowed to choose the activities to do, and they are learning to learn, i.e. that, you've got this cycle of planning, monitoring and evaluation, but it's on a very simple basis. They're playing with the Play-Doh, they want to make a pizza, so they might try and find a cutter to cut the shape. So that's the planning. They're literally planning that they want to make their Play-Doh into a pizza, and they have to find the right cutter for it. They have to then see, is it the right shape? Maybe that cutter wasn't big enough. No, I want to make it bigger. So that's your monitoring. And then at the end of it, when they go and take it over to the teacher and say, oh, would you like my little pizza? They have to see that, did it turn out how they wanted it to turn out? So children in the play situations and preschool are doing all of this, but just very intuitively, because, as I say, 9 times out of 10, they're doing activities that they actually enjoy doing. The crux comes, obviously, and we often see this in school as well, is as they move into what is often year 1, grade 1 in the US, where learning becomes more structured. And, you have to do every day, you have to do some maths, you have to do some reading, you have to do some letter formation. There's all these things suddenly that you have to do. And the teacher's talking to you about lots of different things. And at that point, the child really does actually genuinely have a choice of how much they engage in the task and how much learning actually happens. And of course, some children don't even realise that they are meant to be more engaged. For some children, it is literally just getting through the school day and keeping Miss happy. Other children very quickly realise that these are skills they need to master, and therefore are much more motivated. So it's interesting that learning process, is happening almost straight away. But we do need metacognition, I would say, to make the most of the opportunities that are given to us. And it's very clear as a teacher for many years that some students really make the most of what's going on in class and others don't. The caveat I would put around it, and that's also where the slant of this webinar is slightly different, is that if you have a learning difference or you're neurodiverse, then the challenges are much bigger, and it can seem like you're choosing not to learn, but actually you don't have the tools to learn in that particular situation. And also the learning is not being presented in a way that is accessible to you. So it becomes much more complicated. And that's where I would argue that metacognition is so pivotal for students who have learning differences. Many students are just self-sufficient, and they just progress through school, and it kind of just happens to them without them even really realizing. But for someone who is neurodiverse or someone who has a learning difference to succeed in school, their mindset has to be different, and they have to understand themselves. Otherwise, the journey through school can be very, very traumatic, I would argue. I still, and I feel quite frustrated with myself that I still remember vividly my school experiences, and they were in the main not positive. And I still have that with me, where I think I'm going to be in trouble. I'm doing my best and I think I'm going to be in trouble. And that's as an adult. And it just sounds ridiculous, actually, when I say it. If the head teacher, and I'm in the senior position now, if the head teacher asked to see me, I still have this feeling that, I'm doing the wrong thing, because that was my school experience. I thought I was doing the right thing, and inevitably I wasn't. So so it's just thinking about the learning process. My experience is that many students do not really understand the learning process. And I would equally argue that perhaps some teachers and parents don't really understand it, because there seems to be this idea that just by being present in a lesson, that the learning is going to take place. I mean, I have this from teachers all the time, when I quite often want to withdraw a child or a small group to do something that is more closely matched to their ability, or is building the skills to help them access the curriculum better. And people go, oh no, they can't miss this lesson, because then they'll get behind. And you're thinking, how can they get behind when they actually don't have the skills that they need to do what you're asking them to do in the lesson? Until they have those pre-skills, those underlying skills, you're talking about all these things and they can't really access it at all. So they're not really missing anything. So the idea of just simply being present is really, not the case. But many children just feel, particularly when they are younger, just the fact that they're at school, they must be learning, and parents feel the same. So there has to be an engagement on the part of the student. There has to be some sort of actual cognitive processing going on for it actually to be learning. And then also, I also find that many students don't realise that learning something new is difficult. I think most of us remember learning to ride a bike, for example, and we fell off. But, what motivated us to get on again? Well, in my case, I wouldn't have been able to play with my friends. So the children who played in the streets around me, everyone was on their bicycle. If I wasn't able to be on a bicycle, I wouldn't have been able to join in. And so therefore I had the motivation, and I persevered. But I wasn't surprised. I'd seen other people learn to. I wasn't surprised when I fell off and I grazed my knee and then I had to try again. But somehow now, because we're very wanting to protect people and protect children, there is this perception that, learning should be easy. And at school, we also scaffold things sometimes, so much so that we almost take away the learning. And I'm not saying, obviously, I don't want students to be stressed and not understand things. But sometimes things have to be a little bit tricky for us to develop the skills that we need to develop. And, you know, as I say, many things that we have to learn in life need a lot of practice to be able to do them. So and then the last bit on here is that, you know, the reason I think metacognition is so important is because our abilities, though there is, and you'll see this on the next slide, though there is this whole nature v nurture argument, in essence, what we put into it makes a huge difference to what actually comes out. We all know, we've all had things where it's a difficult skill for us to master, and yet we have managed it because we just put in the sheer hard work. I know it doesn't work for everything, but you know, there is an element of that, and I think some children don't really realise how much, you know, you might need to invest in something if you want to be able to do it or learn it. So then just going on, just again, a few thoughts. And I know this, again, is talked about a lot in the media, fixed mindset, and you'll see there's one on the growth mindset. I'm using it in a slightly different kind of context, but there is this whole element of what we actually believe about our own learning is actually key. And I would say for a child, that is actually really, really shaped by their parents and what their parents are saying, and then also shaped by the school environment they're in. I mean, when I was at school, it was, you're good at maths, you're not good at English. And that was okay. I mean, that's why I didn't realize I was dyslexic until I was in my 30s, because I was very good at maths and science. I wasn't good at English. That isn't an unusual profile. And people just expected that. So there wasn't any, at school, there was no thought, if you weren't doing very well, there was actually no thought that you as the teacher should change your delivery, because it was just the child didn't have that ability. We changed a lot since then, not quite maybe as far as I would like it to have changed, but we do now, a lot of teachers do now realise if a child isn't learning something, there is something that they can do to make things different. Obviously, the child obviously has to also engage, but you'll very often find if you change your approach, the child will engage. And as adults, it's much easier for us to change our behaviours than for children to change their behaviours. But what people are saying around you and their attitude can really, really shape what you think about learning, and whether you think, oh, you know, I'm just not good at maths, then I'm not really going to try. It doesn't really matter. Or the idea, oh, you know, I'm learning maths. It is going to be a bit tricky for a while, but I know I will get the hang of it. And that kind of self-belief that having these bumps along the way is just normal and you can get through. And a lot of it depends what the parent is saying at home, and also, as I say, what the teacher is saying at school. So those two mindsets are I'm not very good at maths, means that if you're in a maths lesson, you're just going to do the bare minimum. You accept that you're never going to be very good at it. You're not going to really try. You know, I'm simplifying it, because obviously some people have barriers around learning maths if you haven't got good visual perception. And I'll come on to that about having the tools. You know, if you haven't got very good visual perception, it is going to be harder for you. But if you're not even engaging in the process, then that's going to be even harder still. So just the idea that we're all learning. And I think as adults, we can be the ones modeling. I mean, I talk to the students all the time about the fact that I still, you know, every day I'm learning new things about teaching. Even last night I was watching, and there's a link in here, a little kind of YouTube video, and there were bits in there that I hadn't actually realised. And I actually had to change one of my slides. So you'll see that. This is the next slide. About growth mindset. So growth mindset, I think, has been very, you know, it's been widely publicized, and so much so that I think people just think that that is the key. And of course, having an open mind to learning has to help, but it is only like one piece of the puzzle. And you'll see there's a picture there. There's a man. He's a scientist. I think he's actually a doctor. So Jared Cooney Harvath, probably haven't said it right. He's actually an Australian guy. It makes it sound really complicated. I was really lucky enough to hear him speak in Hong Kong a number of years ago. And it really did change my mind about the way that we think. It was very, very interesting about all the neuroscience now, and really understanding how our brain works. But he has a very interesting, they're all on YouTube. And I've also put the link to his website where you can find them. There's lots of these very short videos. They're about, I don't know, they're not even 5 minutes each. And they take different bits of research and it's kind of myth busting basically. But in this one, he talks about the fact that actually the research shows that just teaching about growth mindset and or doing teaching about it or doing a specific intervention about growth mindset has no impact on academic achievement. That's not to say it's not something worthwhile and it has no impact, but it has no impact on the things that we measure. So it can have an impact, obviously, on someone's well-being and their ability to function each day in school and feel good about themselves. And that's not to be knocked at all. But in terms of academic achievement, all the correlations are that it doesn't make any significant difference, which is really interesting because I think, people really buy into all these things. I mention it because I think it is one piece of the puzzle. So having that idea that I can improve, I can get better, I can learn new things, can make a huge difference. And, I would quote an example of a student I taught when I was in Vietnam. So I taught a student who was exceptionally good at maths, a Korean student, and hence he was part of my maths extension group. But at my maths extension group, we did problem solving. He was amazing at calculations. He was not amazing at problem solving. And the first few weeks, even the first few months that I worked with him as part of a group, he just found it incredibly hard. If he couldn't find the answer instantly, he would just shut down and he would then just start doodling on the page. And sometimes he'd get quite emotional because he could see other people doing things and he couldn't do it. And that wasn't something he was used to because he was a bright boy. But we talked a lot about the learning process and particularly things like problem solving. And in problem solving, you do have a dip. You have that initial excitement. I'm going to solve this problem. You try some ideas, but then if they don't immediately work, which very often they don't, you then have this dip where you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is too hard for me. And you have to find a way of coming out of that dip and thinking, actually, I'm going to try this different thing. Actually, I will be able to solve it. And it is that mental, it's the self-talk and it's that mental attitude that then brings you out of that slump. And then, then the reward is that you've solved the puzzle. But very often children can't stick with it long enough to go through this. They try a couple of things, it doesn't work, and then, it's a disaster. And as I say, particularly for some very capable students who falsely believe that, I can just learn everything instantly. I've had the same thing with my son, who is exceptionally bright. But the few things that he's found challenging in life have been really, really painful because he thinks something's wrong. He desperately thinks something wrong, that he can't grasp it straight away, instead of it actually being like a normal process. So anyway, going back to this Korean boy, so every week we would talk about problem solving and what's involved in problem solving. And over the weeks and the months, his attitude changed and he tried, he would persevere with things a bit longer. And he became actually one of my best problem solvers. I worked with him for 2 years. And, we also took part in this competition. The first year we took part in the competition, he got a bronze for it, which he was mortified because he's a, gold medal student. But having said that, a year later when he tried it again, he did get gold. He got one of the highest marks. So it's just, that's where the difference is. So the growth mindset, but think how many factors are involved in that. That wasn't just me saying, oh, keep your mind open. I gave a lot of instruction about problem solving. He had a lot of encouragement from home. He was given the tools to be able to problem solve. He had his peer group who he could see were working through things, which made him see that it was normal, work for it longer. So there's a whole lot of factors involved, is what I'm trying to say. Interesting, if you look at Jared's videos, there is one about nature v nurture, and he says that we shouldn't even be talking about nature v nurture, that actually they're so intertwined that our genes, yes, do have an effect, but our environment does two, and you can't really separate which is having more or less of an effect. So I recommend those videos. So yeah, just follow the link on here and you'll find them. But yeah, so the interesting thing is, anyway, that it's just this idea that I think most people are now accepted, that our brain can learn new things, it can develop. And, you know, all through our lives, we can learn new skills if we are taught in the right way, if we interact in, I say in the right way, but in a way that helps us. And it was interesting. This was the new thing that I learned when I spoke to him, heard him speak, was this whole idea about, you know, when we're practicing things, our mind, and we're doing things that we're comfortable with, our mind almost goes into autopilot. You think of all the things that we do every day without really thinking. And, and that's because otherwise it would be exhausting for us. And it's only when we're learning something new, and particularly when we make a mistake, our brain suddenly goes, that wasn't what I was expecting. What went wrong there? And that's when your mind is open and the new pathways get made, and we adjust our thinking. So again, it's really important that we talk to students about how making mistakes is learning. It's like me falling off the bicycle. I had to work out why did I fall off? It was in this instance, it was I wasn't pedaling fast enough. I was only pedaling a little bit, and then I got wobbly and I fell off. So you have to work out what is going wrong, and mistakes are part and parcel of that. And then I've already kind of touched on this. The parents, I think, and again, I feel like in the education process, and particularly as students get older, we kind of shut parents out of it. We're the educators, we know your child best, we know what they need. And obviously parents come at things from a different perspective, and sometimes they don't understand what we're trying to achieve in school, but equally they know their child better, I would argue, than any teacher ever can. And the way that they are at home and what they view, again, I think really shapes what your child ends up being like, and also how they view learning. So I've always been, as someone who is dyslexic, I've always been very open about my mistakes and the things that I find challenging. And I think that is very helpful. But what a parent says, when the child's maybe doing some homework at home, that makes a big difference then to how they end up approaching things. So, if they're saying, they're doing some maths problems and they're really struggling with them, and the parent goes, oh, don't worry, I'm not good at maths either. Well, then, the child straight away is like, well, I'm never going to be good. Why should I put a lot of effort in? And, that's gone. I hope the internet, my thing says that my internet connection is not good. So please just message me if you're having trouble. If it is freezing or anything like that, just put a message in the chat. But again, if the parent sees that the child is okay, that's good. So if the parent sees that the child's struggling and they're going, I can help you get better at this. Times tables are difficult. I can help you get better at them. Let's do a little bit of practice each day. That's a very different scenario, and it plants a within the child. And then also just the whole idea that, that things can be hard when you first start something. But if that's the message the parent is giving, then that's very different than if the message is, oh, don't worry, you're not good at that. We'll focus on this. And yes, I would fully agree that you should focus on things that your child is good at, and they should spend lots of time, I would argue, doing the things that make them feel good. But it doesn't mean that you can't master skills that are more difficult for you if you persevere and, as I say, you work in a way that works for you. And that's part of the whole metacognition thing, is understanding yourself as a learner. I know to learn a second language, I can't just immerse myself in it. I mean, that just literally gives me a headache, and I can't register anything. I need a lot of visuals. I need to see words written down before I speak them. When I was learning my French, I used to record myself and then listen to it back, because I find it very hard to put words together. to make a sentence. I learn lots of vocabulary, but I find it very hard to formulate the sentences, particularly when I'm on the spot. So knowing that about yourself, that's not a bad thing to know about yourself. You then can find a way that works for you. And that's also part of the whole metacognition thing. I suspect I've started, as ever, I suspect I've started talking about things that are on other slides. But anyway, that's fine. So, so I think I've already started to touch on this. So motivation is, I would say, is one of those key things. Some children and some students have goals very early in life, and that makes them determined to do something. Like your students who want to be a football player. I mean, maybe it's an unrealistic goal, but those students will go, even when they're tired after school. They will go to every practice. They will kick the ball up and down in front of their house because they have the drive, and so having that kind of motivation to overcome difficulties is quite pivotal. And I would say many of the people in life who are actually successful is because they've had such a drive and such a motivation within themselves that's pushed them through. Sometimes it is a motivation for your parents. I mean, my parents always felt school was hugely important, and I always knew that. And I've been the same with my son. And so, I knew that they would be mortified if I didn't do well. And, and that is, though it's external motivation, it is a motivation nonetheless. I'm not saying that we should do things just to please other people, but it is a factor in life. And then, so the motivation and the resilience are key, because it does determine how we approach a task. So you imagine in the classroom, some children are just literally trying to get the thing done. They'll write any old thing that they can think of because they just want to get the task done. Whereas other children think, well, this is a learning opportunity. Miss has been talking about adverbs. I'm going to see if I can add some adverbs in it. And that's a very different approach to a task. Like I was talking about the Korean boy, it's a difference between, for the first few lessons I had him for, he only did about half the lesson, if that, because he just gave up. And then he wasn't getting the learning, understanding the lows. So yeah, I've already kind of touched on that, the lows within the learning process. And then there's also, it's just a lot of it is the perception. So I say, I've met many students, as you can imagine, and so many of them have this belief that learning should be easy. And I think it's partly because of our preschool, the way we tend to, I say the we, I'm largely talking obviously about the US and the UK and kind of British style schools, but where they are allowed to choose, because it's very interesting, Asian preschools are not the same, but where they are allowed to choose, they will choose things that feel that they find easy and they enjoy. And of course, why shouldn't they? But then it gives a false perception. So because there are some things that all of us find, for whatever reason, maybe we did more of those things when we were little, maybe there is something inherent within us that means there's certain things that just feel better for us. But when you have those things, then you think that everything is going to be like that. And that's why some children really do. And I see it even, like, say, in year one in the English system, which is like 5-year-olds. I think grade 1 in the US is 6-year-olds. But around that age, when you start doing more kind of formal schooling, it's a shock to some children that actually, Miss is asking me to write my name and I'm finding it really hard to hold the pencil properly and I can't remember the letters in my name. And then there's this whole kind of panic that this thing isn't easy when everything has been easy. So you have that to overcome. And then also what sometimes people don't realize is what's happening at home for some students. So obviously when children are learning to read, for example, some children seem to learn to read so easily. And then I know I've worked with children where you can see they're just so upset by the fact that they're struggling to learn the alphabet and these other children already know it and are reading whole books. But what they don't realize, it's not necessarily that these children are brighter some of these children were interested in books when they were, 2 or 3. And, they were playing alphabet puzzles, and their parents played I Spy with them, and they got introduced to these sounds. Or maybe they've got an older brother and sister who they listen to the phonics with. There's all sorts of things that happen at home. A bit same maths the same. My son is really good at maths, but we counted the steps from when he was really little. We count we put out the plates on the table, and I'd be like, how many plates do we need? We look at the clock. We have to go out 1:15. How long is that? And we were talking about, it's just the way I am. We were talking about those things from a very early age. We played dice games and dominoes when he was tiny. So when you have all of that foundation, of course, when you get to school, this very basic number work is just, you're all ready to rock and roll, shall we say. Whereas other students, they've never done those things. They've never played a board game. They've never seen a dice. And of course, children have no way of realizing that. They just think, oh, what, these children are really clever and I'm not, which is not the reality. And then, of course, if you are dyslexic or you have ADHD or some other learning difference, that's another layer again, because, of course, you're not going to learn things in the same way as other people do. And that's also very disconcerting. So I hope, I'm just going to take a little breath and have a bit of water. I hope that's all making sense. As I say, when I did the slides, it was funny because I feel like I feel like I've done metacognition forever, but it's the first time I've really had to try and pull it apart and work out, what it is, and try and think, how do I explain it to other people? And I didn't want to, I could have gone on the education endowment fund thing, and I could have just taken all their things and just nice neatly, but I didn't. I chose to kind of unpack it in the way it works for me. And then it was interesting because I looked last night, and interestingly enough, when you look at their 7 things that they recommend, and it's on my very last slide, nearly all the things they recommend I had actually already included. So that was quite reassuring. But I wanted to do it that way around because I wanted, as I say, this to be more from my experience than, just something that actually you could just go and read on the internet. So why is it important? And I'm in danger of repeating myself. It's because how we approach the learning situation, how we are, like even now, I need to try and start learning Swedish, and I know I will go to classes. Now, how I behave in those classes, whether I sit there and just kind of let it all just wash over me and then I practice it at home, or whether I really kind of push myself out of my comfort zone and try and say some things, even though it will make me feel quite embarrassed. It's the difference. It's the choice of how you, and I have to say, I'm not that motivated because everyone speaks English here. And I don't really need Swedish. So that's another factor. So you see, even in a simple thing like that, there's lots of factors. And okay, I'm an adult, but for a child, it's the same. They have the choice when they go to school. Do I just sit and chat to my friends and do enough to keep the teacher happy? Or do I really try and engage in the learning process and improve my thinking skills and develop as a person? And so that affects what we, it affects how long we stay on it. It also affects what we stay in our heads. Because as I say, if you think that learning is easy and then you're finding things difficult, the internal dialogue could be, I'm stupid. I can't read my name. The other people in my class can read their name. I can't read why am I so stupid? And that can literally be the internal dialogue. Whereas if you realize that actually it's a skill that needs a lot of practice and there's a lot of things involved in it, and some of these other children have already practiced at home, I know a young child might not be able to perceive all of that. But even, as I say, going into secondary school, where you see many students kind of opt out and they either adopt being like the class clown, or they find lots of work avoidance. Oh, I need to go to my locker, you know, I need to go to the toilet. You know, they have a choice. But then there's other children with exactly the same, other students with exactly the same ability, who know that it's important they would listen hard and kind of push through the pain almost. And I've just assessed a student very much like that, where she must absolutely work overtime to do what she's achieved. And there's other students who've got the same ability, who are in the same year group, as I say, who just, this is too, you know, they just internally think this is too hard, and they just literally opt out. So it is very important how we feel about things, and that is to do with understanding. And then knowing what to do to make the learning stick, because the reason that some people then opt out or you know, start giving up is because they practice something one day and the next day they've forgotten it. And particularly if you're dyslexic, I mean, I've talked about this, about Groundhog Day. You know, if you've got working memory difficulties, you do something in class, the teacher goes through it, you think, great, I've got the hang of it. And the next day it's like you've never done it. And the teacher's frustrated and you're frustrated. So that's why I would argue for neurodiverse learners, it's just vital that they understand what is actually going on. Why are they finding it so hard? Who are they as learners? What can they do? What should the teacher do to make that learning successful? Because I would argue everyone can learn. I mean, I've experienced it many times. I used to teach year 3 many moons ago, and I had a boy who came into my class from year 2, obviously, who didn't know his alphabet. And if you think by year 2 going to year 3, most children are reading simple sentences. You know, they can read words like cat and shop, and many children are doing it even further. And this child didn't even know his alphabet. And I was told that this boy couldn't learn. You know, he was just thick. That's what we said in those days. You know, he was just thick, and you know, don't bother with him. Now, you know, of course, I'm not that sort of person. I stuck with it, and luckily his mum was prepared to stick with it. And actually, with a bit of encouragement, he wanted to learn it. He'd just never been taught it in a way that worked for him. And so I was very lucky to have a wonderful learning assistant. But I devised the program, and there was a lot of tactile. You know, we went back to the tactile of making the letters with Play-Doh, and then, you know, talking about the letter and looking at the shape of it and saying the sound and looking at objects. And it was all done one-to-one. And he did learn his alphabet, and he learned how to read. You know, when I left the school, the mum actually gave me a crystal elephant because she said, I will never forget you. And I've never forgotten them either. So that's, you know, I honestly don't believe, I know some people have got some mental challenges, and not everyone has the same intellectual ability, but I would argue that most children can learn. And, you know, to say differently is a huge disservice. So our emotions are hugely, I'm going to have to go a bit quicker now, I realise I'm talking so much. So how we feel makes a huge difference. You know, it makes a difference that whether we bother to listen to you know, if we think, oh, I'm stupid, I can't learn this. Well, you know, you're not going to listen to the teacher because you kind of think, well, this is pointless. And, you know, I've been in situations like that where I think, oh, you know, this is not for me. And then you just switch off. You know, again, I feel like I'm repeating. I hadn't realised actually how much of it all kind of interlinked. But yeah, our perception of the task is hugely important. And then negative, and this is what I work a lot with the students, because now I'm lucky enough to be able to work with older students, and I'm really hugely enjoying it, working with students who are like 14, 15. But that's why I find it amazing. This is why I feel this is so important, because these students, you know, they don't really realise that their negative self-talk is what's making them perform badly in their exams, for example. So in class, they do these activities, they get the hang of algebra, they know they've got to do it step by step and move the different bits, and they got it all fine. Then they get into exam and they go, I can't do this, I'm not very good at maths, oh, this is too hard. And all of that negative self-talk affects your memories, because then, yes, of course, you forget the method. You're so panicked, and that links to the next part. You go into fight or flight, And if you get that stress that you're going to fight or flight, of course, your whole logical part of your brain is shut down and you are just literally in this kind of panic mode, which is, is no good for exams, for example. So that's, so again, I think talking, encouraging children to talk about how they feel about their learning. Are you feeling a bit nervous about trying this? Would it help if you did it, you worked with a partner? Would it help if I sat with you while you did the first couple till you get the hang of it? There's all sorts of things that we can do, and parents are amazing at this. And I would also argue, like, for the children who are neurodiverse, the ones that I've seen make the most progress are the ones who have those parents who spend many, many painful hours reassuring their child that it's okay. I know you've practiced this 20 times, but you will get the hang of it. And, or like, I know this is hard, but let's just do these couple today and we'll do a couple more tomorrow. All of those things kind of are very helpful. But we have to understand how emotions, the part emotions play in our whole day-to-day life, but particularly when we're trying to learn. Because if we don't feel happy and safe, we're not going to learn. And then most importantly, and this is where I say that's where I put the caveat around the growth mindset. The idea of just having the growth mindset and just knowing that your emotions play a part in it is no good if you're not actually going to teach children the tools. And I obviously I can't talk too much about this today because that is in some of my other webinars. So the ones that I've done about study skills and working memory and memory techniques. There isn't time to have all of that today, but it is about giving them the tools. Students need to know how to access the information. If they have working memory challenges, they need to know that they actually need the notes in front of them. And as they get older, perhaps they can self-advocate and say, Miss, could I have a copy of those notes? But knowing that you can't, you're not going to be able to learn in a certain way is actually quite helpful. Students need to know, perhaps they need to say under their breath what's being said as the teacher's talking for them to be able to process it. Perhaps they need the diagram. Perhaps they need clarification from their friend that's next to them. But just understanding, I know some people find visual information much harder to access than auditory information, for example. So then, knowing that actually, perhaps if I listen to something about this, I listen to an audio book or, I watch a video, and that will help me. And then understanding, as I say, pivotally understanding, and it amazes me, as I say, having this year worked with like a 15-year-old student, the fact that he really didn't know how his memory worked. He had just been like reading the notes, and sometimes, of course, he wasn't really reading the notes. Some students even as they start their IGCSEs, they have an idea that just being in lesson is enough. And of course, it's not enough. Just listening to all this stuff does not mean it's going to stick. And so understanding that they have to be more engaged in the process, understanding that they need to do retrieval practice, for example, maybe talk to their parents, talk to a sibling about what they've learned that day to try and make it stick, using rhymes and words association, all sorts of things that you can do to help the memory work. But you have to understand that, and everyone's memory works differently as well. So you have to understand your memory strengths. Does it help you to have things color-coded? Does it help you to verbalize and explain to someone? And then understanding how to work through a task. I talked a lot about this in my task initiation webinar about, having the right scaffolding and being able to break things up into steps. But just know it, and also knowing that you will get, if it's a long task, you might get 20 minutes in and your brain might get very tired. Maybe you need to take a break. But it's interesting how so many students don't really understand this. And if they did understand it, they would approach lessons and they'd approach activities differently. And then knowing yourself is the key, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and knowing it's okay for your strengths and weaknesses to be different than other people. And then working out how to use your strengths. And this is very, very important it's the bit I think that gets missed with with people who are neurodiverse or have learning differences is really utilizing their strengths, because all of them do have strengths. I mean, I utilize my strengths now. My strength is in making these presentations and you know, the verbal communication. And my strength is not in, you know, I'm trying to finish a dyslexia report at the moment, and that is definitely not my strength. That's actually quite painful, trying to, you know, type it out, and it takes me hours. But, you know, so knowing how you learn best is really, really important. And then that all works together. But it's really important, if your school is going to do work on metacognition, it is about giving people the skills and the understand the tools of how to learn. So things like study skills, and in the autumn, I'm going to start a study skills program with our year 7s, with the hope that then if they get that at the beginning of secondary, you know, they'll be able to use those tools moving on. But it's particularly targeted at students we've already identified as having learning differences. So, yeah, so I feel like I've still got, I have a feeling my other slides are a little bit shorter, so that will be good. And I, as I say, I think touched on some of these things already. So how to teach metacognition, you know, it's like a lot of these things, the things that are become the kind of buzzword, that we somehow think it's kind of rocket science, it's something really complicated. And then when people unpick it, it's actually something quite straightforward. So I would argue metacognition can be taught right from the beginning. And as I say, I used to work with reception children, teaching them phonics, and we talk about brain exercise. You know, we'd make light. I was about to say laugh when someone made a mistake. I don't mean that, but you know, we'd make light of it if someone made a mistake. You know, it's the attitude to learning, and it kind of making it okay to have another try. I didn't quite get it right this time, let's have another try. But planting those ideas that learning is a process, it's not something we're going to learn in one day, I think all helps. And it is the drip feeding, so it is that constant kind of dialogue that you're having, and you know, and for children to also identify that you as a learner as well, that it's not just, you know, it's not something, you know, some children feel like it's something being done to them. You know, there's the teacher, she knows all the answers, isn't she amazing? And parents can be a bit like that too, where they hide a lot of their struggles. I'm not saying, obviously, you have to talk to your children at an age appropriate level. There's some things that you're dealing with in your own personal life that are not appropriate for like a 5-year-old to know. But there are some things, you know, if you're starting your new job and you're feeling a bit nervous, I think that's quite good for a 6-year-old to know. Mummy's starting her new job today, and I'm not sure how I'm going to get there. I'm going to check on the map, and I think I'm going to leave a bit early today, so in case something goes wrong, so I want to be there fresh and on time, and I'm feeling a bit nervous. Just that kind of reality around something, I think helps. You know, as I say, I'm talking, when I was in Belgium, I went to French lessons, and now I'm going to have to try and do Swedish lessons. But, you know, just talking to your child about, you know, actually, I think that's going to be really challenging for me, and explaining why. Because then it brings a reality around things, not that everything in life is just easy and we can just all learn it instantly. And then that you do need the specific, and I think this is the important bit. And I feel like with the growth mindset and some of the things, the well-being things that we do in school, it's all very well. I often say this about well-being. You know, it's all very well doing 5 minutes of mindfulness in a staff meeting. This is something that often happens in school, or, you know, your boss buying you nice croissants for a meeting. But then if you've got to go home and work till 7 o'clock at night to finish a report that they need the next day, then, you know, it's not really much well-being, is it? You know, the very fact you've done this mindfulness and you're panicking about the fact you haven't finished the report, and then they can give you a nice croissant or some nice treat, but it doesn't mean that you still have, you know, you had 10 reports to do in 2 days, and it was the workload that was unreasonable. So it's like, that's what I'm trying to say, is that we don't want metacognition to be some kind of tokenistic thing. That's the sort of point I'm trying to make, that sometimes we have these fads in education, but there's no real substance to them. This, I believe, you can have substance to, but you have to then, as I say, you do have to teach the study skills. You have to teach how to learn. And this is where the teacher does really come in, and it can be the parent. So modeling the learning process, and some students just don't realize what's involved. So you're saying, you say, oh, I want you to do a research project on the rainforest. Well, some students just don't even know where to begin on that. So, modeling the thinking process, we're going to do it on the rainforest. Now, I'm wondering whether I should try and do all the rainforests in the world. Should I talk about rainforests in general? Or I'm thinking, should I pick a particular country? And you think, I went to visited Borneo recently. I think I might pick Borneo. And so even that very first bit of just kind of breaking down that actually you are making a decision. So I've decided I'm doing it on Borneo. Now, how will I go about it? What do I need to know? And giving some ideas. So, I need to know where Borneo is. I need to know why it has a rainforest. Maybe I want to research some of the particular plants that are only found in Borneo. Did you realize that each rainforest is a bit unique? And you, by you kind of talking through things, and at the same time you can be making notes and bullet points on the board, that helps students understand the learning process. So any time that you can kind of think out loud, you can do the same with something like reading comprehension. You read a story, and then it's got a question. How does Hansel and Gretel feel when they're walking through the woods? And you can say, oh well, I guess they maybe feel a bit scared because they haven't been that far in the woods before. Maybe they're a bit worried because their dad's going to wonder where they are. Have you felt like that before? But it's that kind of conversation around things that then makes the learning. It's not just, oh, I'm going to scan the text and look for, Gretel felt scared. It's kind of thinking around things. And also sharing how you feel, because when I do the math extension groups, I deliberately don't look up the answers to the problems. I have the problem, I don't look up the answer, and I work through it with them. And sometimes I get stuck and I say, oh, this doesn't seem to be working, I think I might try this. And I will say, oh, I'm feeling a bit frustrated because I thought I would have got an answer by now. And students just knowing that you experience the same things that they do, I think makes a huge difference. And then also, this is also pivotal, and it is one of the ones that is on the endowment fund kind of checklist, is about students evaluating and being involved. So students can learn so much from each other. So if you solve a problem, and I always used to do that, if you solve a problem, you ask the different students to explain how they did it and how did they feel during the process. And again, everyone's way of working out is slightly different, encouraging that idea that we might think differently. Well, I did trial and improvement, and it was a bit frustrating, but then I worked out this. Another person might say, oh, well, no, I decided I was going to work systematically. And another one said, no, I couldn't do it like that. I needed to draw a diagram, and I drew these things out, and that helped me work it out. And all of that is hugely helpful. And now I'm conscious of time, and I do forgive me for I will slightly overrun. I hope that's okay, because I obviously put way too much on here. So just knowing that and I've just touched on that. So knowing that there are different ways of doing the same task. There's lots of ways of learning spellings, for example. That's a good one. And if you Google it, you'll come up with, you can air write words, you can color code the letter pattern in them, you can say the letters out loud, you can get magnetic letters, you can make up a mnemonic. And I think if you do those things from a very early age, then it becomes the norm that there isn't one way. When you're solving a math problem, how did you work it out? And for revising for exams, again, some people, they need to record themselves talking about things. They need to teach their dog how to do algebra. and that helps them the verbalizing. Other people need to make mind maps and have all the visuals, and some people need to walk around, maybe put post-its around their workroom, pick the post-its up, say them, match them together. You know, we all learn differently, and I think the sooner that students know that, the better. And providing lots of these rich learning experiences where it is open-ended and there is problem solving, that helps the metacognition, because it's not just working through an exercise. It's not just doing it how Mrs. Trethui wants me to do it, or how my mum's taught me to do it. It's exploring different ways of doing things. And then there isn't time. The I think I've done memorization techniques in another webinar. But there are all those different memorization techniques, and it's about finding what works for you. So luckily, we are heading towards the end. I'm conscious now that I'm on my time. So yeah, so this is like the last bit, don't worry. So this is the bit that is really important for those who've got learning differences. They need to learn how to remember things, because when their memory, particularly their working memory, is not good, they forget things from one day to the next. It's our job to teach them how to remember. They're never going to engage in the learning process if they realize that they try something one day and then they can't do it the next, or they've completely, you know, the teachers explain something and they've already completely forgotten it. Building up that positive view that you are a learner, you can achieve it, you can get there, and then that allows them to actually engage and to be engaged. And that's why I would say sometimes taking children individually or in a small group sometimes is the only way to get them to engage, because it takes away the fear of what's going on around them and what other people are going to think, or needing more repetitions. And that's why sometimes the parent input is actually the pivotal bit. Having more time in a relaxed environment to go through things step by step in a way they can't do at school can make all the difference. Which is interesting why some parents say, oh, but my child has no trouble with this at school, at home. You know, you talk about, oh, they find this thing very difficult, and the parents say, oh, but when I work with them one-on-one at home, they seem to get it just fine. Well, yeah, the environmental difference is key, but that's not a bad thing. You know, it's just knowing that they need that input to be able to access the learning, and then developing that whole kind of strong work ethic and realizing that, you know, worthwhile things, I have to say, in life do not generally come easy. So this is, I promise, the last bit, and this I've already actually mentioned. So if you want to do some further reading and you know, you are interested, and particularly if you'll present it to other people or perhaps to a school, the Education Endowment Foundation, I said foundation, sorry, does have this very useful, lots of useful documents, and also a little video that explains about metacognition. And you know, luckily, as I say, I looked at this last night after I had done the slides, and I realized that actually nearly everything in this I'd actually covered, which is quite reassuring. And then also all of these ones, so Cambridge, no surprise, because they have all the different schemes of work. A lot of international schools use Cambridge materials. They've got a whole lot of information about metacognition, very interesting. And then a couple of other websites that had what I consider to be quite accessible information if you are wanting to share, like with colleagues, because I think my slides don't really work without me kind of talking around them, whereas these are much more information and what do I want to say, things that you could photocopy and share with colleagues, or share the links with colleagues. And then there is an article, as ever, there is an article on my blog. So wow, I actually didn't think that was. Sometimes when I do new webinars, I think, oh, that's not going to be long enough. I didn't think it was going to take me quite so long to get through it all, but there we are. My last little bit to say before I say goodbye is that as I am having my summer break from my webinars, but I will start again in September. Please check my website for information about our upcoming webinars, and I will try and also email people to let them know. Just to say, if you do check out if you're not sure how to get to my website, just Google my name, Helen Trethewey, and then you'll see there's a website called Twice Exceptional Learners. I'm trying a new thing over the summer, which is called Ask the Experts. I feel a little bit boastful kind of saying Ask the Expert, but I think after like 22 years in like inclusion, I think I have quite a lot of expertise. And it's a service, it's a consultation service basically, where you can book an appointment with me and I will talk to you for either half an hour or an hour, depending. There is a cost to this, I'm afraid, because it's a bespoke service. But if you're concerned about something personally or concerned about a child, your own child, or if you're a teacher and you want more information about dyslexia or autism or ADHD, I'm very good at, unpicking things and problem solving and signposting people to the right resources. I realized this the other day where I was sat with a parent and we were getting the feedback from a psychologist, and this child's just been diagnosed with ADHD. And the psychologist was lovely, and she was saying all the kind of generic things about what you should do for ADHD. And then we finished the call and the parent turned to me and said, "Oh, do you think I could meet with you? Because I don't really know what to do now." And it suddenly made me realize, we've gone through this whole meeting and she'd got this whole report on her child and she still didn't know actually what she should do at home. What should she do at home different? How should she support her child? And straight away, I was able to signpost her to some really good resources and make some suggestions, practical suggestions, real life suggestions. And so that gave me this little light bulb moment about starting this. So over the summer, the availability, there's a booking system. It's all very straightforward. If you go on it, you'll see the page, Ask the Expert. You can choose what sort of consultation or training you want. You can see my availability. As I say, I'm afraid there is a cost to it. There has to be. This is my summer holiday now. And please, I will publicize it. I'm just getting it all kind of sorted out. But I just thought, given this is a new audience and some old friends too, I would just put it out there. So there we are. So happy summer holidays. I hope it's as sunny and glorious where you are as it is in Sweden at the moment. And I really look forward to sharing time with you again soon. Okay, so bye for me.